Welcome everybody to the seminar today. Our speaker today is Shrutapa Samanto, who is currently affiliated with ISCS Kolkata, but would be moving to the US soon for her second postdoc. And she started a journey as a moonshiner to counting black hole, working on black hole entropy and relationship between modular forms and moonshine in that context with Suresh Govindarajan, but then she started working on honors matter physics. And she's going to tell us about the later today, about what she's doing. So let's hear from Shrutapa now.
Thanks, Ananda. Thanks for a nice introduction. And thank you both you and Suresh for inviting me here. I am going to talk about a new model which I am working on currently with Oyon, Benoit, Joseph, and Horeram. And we study the DC resistivity, Hall resistivity, etc., all these transport phenomena, and found that they have this nice behavior which people usually see in strange metals. So yeah. So let me start by talking about normal metal, regular metal, which are described by Fermi liquid theory. This Fermi liquid theory is a theoretical model for interacting fermions. This was first proposed by Landau around 1956 and later developed by many others. The idea is very simple. Idea is you take a non-interacting fermionic system like Fermi gas and turn on the interaction very slowly such that the ground state of Fermi gas adiabatically transform into the ground state of this interacting system which we call Fermi liquid. Now with this turning on of this interaction, the properties like spin, charge, etc., these things remain unchanged, but mass, magnetic moment, these quantity, they get renormalized to a new value. But there's still this one-to-one correction between the excitations of Fermi gas and excitations of Fermi liquid. The excitations of Fermi gas, we call them electron, whereas or particles, whereas these excitations here in Fermi liquid, we call them quasi-particles. Now, how to understand them, visualize them, these particles and quasi-particles? One easy way to do that is to study the spectral function. The spectral function is defined as minus imaginary part of the retarded propagator. Now you can also study the spectral function in lab using ARPES, that is called atomic resolved photo emission spectroscopy. Now let us see how the spectral function for particle looks like. Yeah. So the spectral function for particles, they are just delta function peaked at the energy of particle or hole, depending on if the energy is positive or negative. So this shows the spectral function for particle here, and this is the spectral function. I mean the same thing corresponding to a hole, which is in the negative axis, negative omega axis. So these are just delta functions. Now let us see how the spectral function of quasi-particle would be. Yeah. Now these spectral functions are no longer delta function, rather they are kind of Lorentzian peak. So they have this thickness which corresponding to some non-zero residue corresponding to these quasi-particles. Yeah, and this quasi-particle picture is amazing. With this kind of simple quasi-particle picture, we can describe almost all the transport phenomena of metals. For example, let's take the DC conductivity. Okay, so the DC conductivity is given by this formula, which is the Drude formula. Here, N is the electron density, E is the electron charge, M star is the effective mass of the quasi-particle at Fermi surface, and tau is the transport scattering time, which is the average time this quasi-particle survive between two scattering. Now this transport scattering time has this kind of temperature dependence. Here this quantity U square, this is the strength of electron-electron interaction. That is, this varies from metal to metal, and hence this conductivity for metal is different for different metal, as we all know. And this behavior, that tau is inversely proportional to T square, is valid at low temperature, and at higher temperature it has more complicated power law dependence on T. And this is very nicely understood from a quasi-particle picture. But if we consider the high TC cuprate superconductors above the critical temperature, this kind of formula doesn't hold any longer. We call this kind of metal, these high TC superconductor, we call them strange metals. And it's seen that for this kind of unconventional metal, the transport scattering time is not inversely proportional to, they don't obey the T square relation, but they are inversely proportional to T. And so this Kb is Boltzmann constant, H bar is the Planck's constant. This F here is a constant, and this is approximately order 1 constant for all high TC cuprate superconductors. I mean, irrespective of which metal we are considering, this F doesn't change much. That means all the cuprate superconductors, they have almost the same value of the of this tau. And this kind of phenomena is called Planckian dissipation. Now, this phenomena, that tau is inversely proportional to T, cannot be explained using quasi-particle picture. It tells us that this kind of well-defined object like particle or quasi-particle picture is no longer true for this kind of strange metals, which are these high TC cuprate superconductors. So the curiosity, I mean, the first question one asks, then how does it look like? How does the spectral function look like? So here is a plot of spectral function. This is from experimental, this ARPES data for this metal, and you see the peaks are no more Lorentzian. They kind of have has this wider tail. It kind of obeys some kind of power law behavior. The above picture is the peaks corresponding to different momentum, and in the lower picture the peaks corresponding to different temperature. And this zero here, zero scale here, they corresponding to the Fermi energy. Okay.
Shutopa, about this plot,
Yeah.
is it true that this typically it is always peak to the whole side, at least for this data that you're showing?
Oh, okay. I am not sure. I just found
Or
this.
the measurement has only been done there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have not read the paper.
Okay.
I just took the plot from the paper and.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So then okay. So generating the theoretical understanding for this kind of strange metal is a challenge for condensed matter physicists. So how do we model this kind of materials? So to model this kind of material, we have to keep in mind the these properties of the spectral function. So what are these properties? Like they should have particle hole asymmetry. So what does that mean? So earlier when I was showing you the spectral function for quasi-particle for Fermi liquid, you saw that if I plot the particle and hole at same energy, they are kind of symmetric with respect to this zeros origin. But here there's a particle hole asymmetry. It's observed experimentally from ARPES data. They have semi-locality. That means there is a very mild momentum dependence of the spectral function as we move towards the Fermi surface. And the third one is that non-trivial scaling exponent with frequency. That means these peaks are no longer Lorentzian, rather they have this power law dependence on the frequency So these properties we have to keep in mind while modeling these metals. And getting this kind of characteristic of spectral function is not easy from first principle approach. And we know that holography has proven itself to be a strong candidate for studying strongly coupled electronic system for decades now. So what it does is it couples the strong coupling in the field theory side to the weak coupling in the gravity side, and there we can treat them perturbatively. Interestingly enough, this kind of these properties of spectral function arise naturally in holography. And the notion of quasi-particle is replaced by the operators in the infrared conformal field theories. And so it's a very nice picture. This conformal symmetry kind of provide a unified picture for transport phenomena. This symmetry is gauge symmetry, and we can use this gauge symmetry to compute all these 2-point, 3-point correlation function, and hence can compute these transport coefficients. But since these theories as gauge theories, the visualization of the microscopic degrees of freedom are not really easy. Also, holography doesn't allow us to couple the theory with any other lattice or band or something like that. So,
just one question. So here, what you mean is that if the symmetries on their own cannot explain transport, or cannot, because you cannot use the conformal symmetry at finite temperature. But what the holographic picture does is to allow you to have some specific to study these theories in a at finite temperature, right? That's the main, and to compute the spectral functions and transport easily. And also this notion of Planckian dissipation easily comes from there, because it's the same kind of universality of holography, like eta bias is universal and things like that. So this gives rise to some degree of universality at strong coupling. So the main thing of holography is that it allows you to do some computations at finite density and finite temperature, which is hard to do otherwise. Okay, just a comment.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but thing is that it has been shown that for Q-parate superconductors, Montanus, the idea of Montanus is essential. So the parent Q-parates, they have to be Mott
Sorry,
insulators.
what is Montanus?
Yeah, that's what I am seeing. This Montanus is okay. This is so they are kind of insulated. The before doping, these parent Q-parates, they are kind of yeah, and Montanus is defined when these lattice is
Mott
connected
insulators.
to the.
You mean they are Mott insulators?
Yeah, I mean they are Mott insulators. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, so it is yeah.
Yeah, and this Mott insulator is kind of different from these regular insulators. So for regular insulators, the insulators, this insulation arises from a field band. But for Mott insulators, these insulations doesn't arise from a field band, but rather these local strongly coupling between the electrons, they kind of create a inner charge gap by splitting a half field band into a lower Hubbard band and a upper Hubbard band. So that's how there's a charge gap, and this kind of charge gap is creating the insulation. So these kind of insulators are called Mott insulators.
So basically, Mott insulators cannot be understood by just weak coupling approaches. You have to use some interactions. Coulomb interactions are important, and
yeah,
so it's basically
and also strong coupling is important. This mechanism is generated by the strong coupling between the this thing. Yeah. So that's how they are different from the regular insulators. Yeah, and this kind of pictures is very hard to engineer from a purely holographic setup. There are few holographic model which can reproduce this strange metallic behavior like DC resistivity, Hall resistivity, etc. but they do it only at very low temperature. And also one need to choose the critical sector very carefully. That means the parameters in the critical sector has to be chosen very carefully. And there is this model in this paper which reproduce this critical phenomena at larger temperature. I mean this DC resistivity, Hall resistivity, etc. for larger range of temperature. But this model is highly convoluted, and I mean there are a lot of parameters, and you need to fine tune lot all of them simultaneously to get this kind of feature. Okay, but
But
our
there are also
model,
models by Cremonini and others which also managed to get this, but only in the low temperature region.
only in the low temperature regime.
Yeah, so those maybe should have also been put citations here.
Okay, yeah, okay. But our model which we built is very simple. We just have two effective coupling constant, and we tune only the ratio of those two coupling constant to get this strange metallic behavior for over a large range of temperature. We also don't need to tune the critical sector very carefully, as long as the value of the parameter from the critical sector is above certain numbers. But our model is not a purely holographic model. This is a semi-holographic model. The idea was first given by Polchinski and Faulkner. So their idea was to just keep the infrared part from the holography and allow it to hybridize with some of the bands of the lattice, like conduction band of electron, etc. So the strong coupling part is captured in the holographic part, and these electrons in these bands, they are weakly coupled, so we can treat them perturbatively. Later, Oyon and Joseph, they built on this. They gave a general model for semi-holography. So here is the model Hamiltonian. The fermion in the conduction band, that is the weak coupling fermion, weakly coupled fermions, are given by this chi, and the fermions in the holographic sector is given by psi. So the first term in the Hamiltonian is just a kinetic term for the weakly coupled electrons, weakly coupled fermions. The second term is a 4 Fermi interaction term mediated by Coulomb potential. The third one is a quartic term. The second line is the coupling between weakly coupled fermions and the holographic sector fermions. As I mean, they consider both the fermion and boson from the holographic sector. So psi is the fermion from the holographic sector, and phi is the boson from the holographic sector. And the last one is the term corresponding to the holographic sector. They have also introduced this parameter n to keep track of the computation diagrammatically. So these powers of n, they are important to get the this self energy contribution from the holographic sector. I mean, the self energy has to be is n dependent, is n independent. So this is what happens. So you see this this chi interaction between chi is of order 1, interaction between chi and psi is of order n, and the psi is of order n square. So the self energy correction to the chi propagator comes from from geometric sum of this kind of diagram. Now here you see this psi has order n square, whereas these vertices here are of order n. So these order n vertices cancels out these 1 over n square dependence from the psi propagators. And this is how the self energy contribution, self energy correction to the psi propagators becomes n independent. Now let us see how relevant are these couplings. To see if the couplings are relevant, irrelevant, or marginal, we need to do an RG analysis. we follow Polchinski type of RG analysis for for our system, because RG analysis around Fermi surface is different from regular RG analysis. For regular relativistic theory, while doing when energy is going to zero, momentum is proportional to energy and momentum also goes to zero. But here, as energy is going to zero, the momentum is going towards the Fermi surface. So K is if the K is momentum, K is moving towards Kf, where Kf is the Fermi momentum. So if we need to shift the cutoff of our theory from lambda to lambda s times lambda, we need to integrate out the momentum modes which lie between this s lambda and lambda. Let's see how the momentum scale.
Yeah, just one comment. So the main thing is that when you're moving towards the Fermi surface, you have also a volume enhancements, and that you have to look at two different things. So one is the volume of the Fermi surface, and so there are two kinds of momenta. One is perpendicular to the Fermi surface, and the other is parallel to the Fermi surface. And they have different scaling. So
yeah,
because energy depends on them in two different ways. So one is linear dependence, and the other one is quadratic dependence. Or so yeah, one has to so one has to basically separate these two, and the scaling and there is so there are two contributors to the scaling. One is the scaling from the phase space, and the other is the scaling from the usual energy. So yeah. Just a comment.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to explain the momentum scaling. So suppose our Fermi momentum is given by T, then we can split the momentum into a part which is on the Fermi surface and a part which is orthogonal to the Fermi surface. And this momentum K, which is tangential to the Fermi surface, the scaling dimension is 0, is the region that Owen just explained, and then the scaling dimension of the part which is orthogonal to Fermi surface is 1. And using this scaling and requiring that for our action has to be scale invariant, we found that the scaling property of chi, the scaling dimension of chi is -12.
Can you explain the splitting? I don't understand. P equal to K plus L. Because Fermi surface, it's a surface, so it's a bunch of vectors, right?
Yeah.
Which one do I choose? Which point on the Fermi surface do I need to choose? Given P.
So, I mean, so you have momentum modes lying above or below Fermi surface, depending on you are considering holes or particles, right?
That's okay, but that's determined by P itself, right? In some sense.
Yeah, so that is determined by P.
Just asking this vector separation. You give me you're given a vector P.
Yeah.
And this decomposition, as far as I can see, is not unique. Or what is the meaning of orthogonal to what?
Yeah. So I think you are just choosing the K that is the shortest distance from P on the Fermi, and K lies on the Fermi surface.
Okay.
So it's just that kind of a decomposition. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Now to determine the scaling of the operators on the holographic sector, so we know that the holographic propagator is inversely proportional to omega power nu, and then using that we get the scaling of the holographic sector operators to be nu minus 1/2. And we have this restriction on nu.
What is nu?
Nu? Okay, nu is the parameter from the holographic sector. So this our propagator in the holographic sector goes as at 0 temperature goes as 1 over omega power nu.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it is omega to the power nu, not 1 over omega to the power nu. The propagator is.
Oh yeah. Yes. I mean, when it enters into the whole propagator,
self energy.
It becomes, it is just omega power nu.
Nu is a scaling dimension. Nu is simply the scaling dimension of the operator in the IRCFT. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, not
Yeah, and
exactly the scaling dimension. It's the scaling dimension.
it's not exact anomalous scaling dimension. It's anomalous scaling
Yeah.
dimension. Because if you think of half as the like half is the normal scaling dimension, then that is anomalous one. Yeah, and then this restriction on nu comes from the fact that in our first paper we didn't treat the Coulomb interactions. Actually, we assumed that all of these things are. We assumed that the Coulomb interactions are. We didn't actually treat it properly, and so we assumed it will be screened. But when we actually looked into the screening in the later work, we found that it can only be screened in this
Range.
in this range. And if Coulomb interactions are not screened, then these kind of RG arguments also can break down. And so that's very well known. And so this, I mean, it may go through, but when you actually do the integrals, they don't work out because there's no scale to suppress the corrections from the UV or so there's an issue there. So therefore, this restriction is needed to be stable against Coulomb interactions too.
Yeah. And also when nu is going towards 1, our theory is going towards a marginal Fermi liquid theory. And with this kind of scaling dimension, we see that all the interactions of this kind, they become irrelevant at the Fermi surface. So, so this kinds of tell us that we just have the contribution from the propagator in the infrared sector. And so, and at the Fermi surface, we kind of have a notion of generalized Fermi, generalized quasi-particle, and that means we can have a generalized Landau Fermi liquid theory kind of thing here.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask?
Yeah.
So why I can understand why you don't want relevant
Yeah,
interactions,
because
but what about marginal values of nu?
We don't want them to be relevant because we don't want the loop correction coming from this infrared sector and everything such that they back react and make the theory more complicated.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
No, but that's a good question. That's a really good question. But I mean, what we see now that we indeed need to push nu very close to 1, not exactly 1, but closest to 1 in order to get this strange metallic behavior. But which makes also possibilities that these kind of things can. So that could lead to the superconductivity. Like normally, what happens? The BCS superconductivity actually comes from the fact that there are certain kind of interactions which have a lot of phase space. Because if you think like taking 2 particles on the Fermi surface and moving them to 2 particles, so these interactions should be like irrelevant. But what happens is that there's an enhancement that comes from the phase space, and that makes them marginal. And that leads to BCS instability of Fermi liquids. So there's a similar possibility here, although we don't have we have a Fermi surface here, but it's still not and which can lead to a similar feature, but this is something that remains to be studied, this kind of instabilities of our. But yeah, so if you push nu close to 1, which we indeed need to do, then these operators become very close to marginal, if not exactly marginal. And this can lead to instabilities. Yeah.
So what's the issue if you just set nu equals 1, if that's the marginal case? Is this technically an issue, or it's?
No, that's a very nice thing, because in the very initial days, a lot of this Cuprate phenomenology was based on this marginal Fermi liquid picture. But what is an advantage of our thing is that in many cases, you cannot compute the spectral function at finite temperature, you do some phenomenological thing. Here we have very specific kind of temperature dependence of the spectral function of the self energy, which is extremely crucial for what, so yeah, we are going to similar to marginal Fermi liquid, but with a very specific temperature dependence and things like that of the spectral function.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So with this model, later these authors, Oyon Joseph and Christian Benoit, they studied this density correlation function, which is also known as Linhart function. And they show that at the low frequency, the feature of Fermi surface kind of remains unaffected. This also provides the notion of generalized quasi-particle. And they also did some random phase approximation type of analysis with Coulomb potential, and they show that there's well-defined collective excitations in the theory. So this kind of collective excitations or plasmonic poles, they are very important to have superconducting instability for non-phonon mediated superconductors. So this is plot of real part and imaginary part of improved Linhart function, and there's these clear poles which you can see when the momentum is above certain numbers. These momentum and frequency, they are all written in terms of Fermi energy, and Fermi energy is considered here to be 0.4 probably for these two pictures.
Yeah, so I can make a comment here. Actually, this diagram is also showing why exactly this diagram connects two parts of your statements. The first statement is that at low frequency and momenta, you have quasi-particles, or a kind of quasi-particle picture is still valid. Because if you remember, in Fermi liquid, you have this continuum, and the collective excitations always, well-defined collective excitations always live outside the continuum, right? So as long as you have a reasonably good quasi-particle picture, you cannot have this collective poles. You cannot have this collective, and you start getting this sharply. But the interesting thing is that this sharp defined excitations live inside the continuum, which cannot be. So you see exactly where the quasi-particle picture is breaking down here. So that's another interesting thing about this plot. Okay, just a comment.
Okay, thanks. But there are few drawbacks of those analyses. For getting this kind of poles, one has to put a sharp cutoff in the frequency. You see that to have pole in the Linhart function, your real part of the improved Linhart function, the real part of the Linhart function has to change sign from negative to positive for this quantity has to have a pole. But that kind of change in sign can only happen if you put a sharp cutoff at the frequency, at very low frequency, in fact, which is not very realistic. Also, all the analysis in this earlier paper, they are done at 0 temperature. Here in our work, we not only generalize the model to a finite temperature, but we also address this issue of having this cutoff dependence by achieving a natural UV completion. So, but thing is that this UV completion doesn't affect the generalized quasi-particle at low energy. The microscopic lattice effects which we have, that is also insensitive to the UV completion. So this UV completion is there, but our low energy theory is not really getting affected by this at the UV part of the theory. Also, our model kind of nicely interpolate from non-Fermi liquid theory at low temperature to Fermi liquid theory at high temperatures. Also, so this is the first time but these transport phenomena has been studied for these semi-holographic models. So we did a little modification to the earlier model. What we did, so we not only couple the two-dimensional conduction band to the infrared sector, but we also couple the band to a another lattice which has this conventional Landau type quasi-particle behavior. Yeah. So this is a cartoon of our model. So this is the infrared sector which is coupled to the two-dimensional electronic band, for example, the conduction band, and this band is also coupled to a lattice. And these F and F daggers, they have this quasi-particle Landau type quasi-particle behavior. The C daggers are now the creation and annihilation operator corresponding to the weakly coupled fermions, and chi dagger represents the infrared sector fermions. So the Hamiltonian is almost the same. The coupling between this infrared sector and these conduction band electrons are same. The power of n is same as we have shown previously. Now we have this new term which is coupling between these fermions C and fermions F. We only consider fermions of the form Cf cube, Cf to the power 5, and so on.
So in a way, these 2D electrons are, the C are basically representative of some upper Hubbard band or something like that. That's the kind of picture that you have in mind. Whereas the IRCFT is this lower band, which becomes sort of strongly coupled and this. So that is sort of the kind of rough idea behind this picture, right?
And for the same reason which we described earlier, our the self energy correction to the propagator is still n independent. So there are two contributions to the self energy correction. One is coming from the IR sector, and another is coming from this lattice. So this is the term which is coming from these electrons F dagger. This kind of term was computed earlier by Chubukov. And this is the term coming from the holographic sector, and at finite temperature, this propagator is given by this formulae. So this is computed by Hong, Liu, Nobil, Iqbal in a paper in 2009. So the whole propagator, we can rewrite the whole propagator by redefining our variables in terms of the Fermi energy. And you see, so we have effectively 3 parameters here. One is gamma, which is related to the coupling between the conduction band electron and the lattice. Alpha, which is related to the coupling between the conduction band electron and the IRCFT. And there's this nu, which is the parameters in the IR sector. And we also have this parameter phi, which has to lie between 0 and 1 minus nu times pi by 2 for the spectral function to be positive. So we have this restriction on this parameter phi. Okay, so let us study the spectral function first. So I have plotted the spectral function for some specific values of the parameters. And as you can see, there's a clear asymmetry between particle and whole. And then the peak here is no longer Lorentzian. So there's this tail which tells us that it has power law dependence on omega. Let us study the momentum dependence of the spectral function. The left plot is the spectral function for different momentum. The solid lines are for this gamma value to be 0, and the dotted lines are for the gamma value to be 0.001. And as you can see, as we move towards the Fermi surface, they almost coincide, and they become separated only when we move away from the Fermi surface. We also study the phi dependence of the spectral function within the limit that is permitted. And we studied that when the momentum is 0, the spectral function becomes, we only pick that value of phi for which the spectral function becomes symmetric around this 0 axis for the uniformity of our computation. So for all throughout our computation, whatever parameter value we chose, we always chose the value of phi such that this spectral function becomes symmetric at 0 momentum.
You mean not 0 momentum, you mean k is equal to k?
Yeah, I mean k is equal to k. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean 0 energy. When k equal to k, this energy part becomes 0. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So let us now study few transport properties for our model. Let us first consider the DC conductivity. It's given by this formula. Here rho is the spectral, rho is the spectral function, the minus imaginary part of the retarded Green function that for our model, and then NF is the Fermi-Dirac distribution function. we
Well, here we are also assuming that the vertex corrections are small, or using some
we are
approaches
considering
of
these.
MGDAL and
These parameters alpha and gamma are sufficiently small such that we don't have any vertex correction or any higher order loop contributions.
the higher order loop contributions can, of course, just change the spectral function. No, sorry. If this parameters are not
I mean,
small,
no
then
back reaction.
Yeah, there is no back reaction, of course, but here the most relevant thing is that we don't have vertex correction, for example. That's the most important. But if there was back reaction, the back reaction is simply suppressed by the large N scaling, like we had, and the smallness of alpha gamma actually tells you that the spectral function, and using RG arguments, should always take that form, right? So that is where you use that. But that is kind of it's a consistent way to assume, because these are indeed irrelevant operators. That is something that you could actually do, like in your loop computations you did, and check that indeed the cutoff dependencies is irrelevant and things like that. It's smaller. Okay, so yeah, good. Yeah.
Okay. So here we are plotting the slope of the DC conductivity with respect to temperature, the slope of the log plot of the DC conductivity with temperature. So in the first plot, in the left hand side, we have chosen gamma to be 0.01 and nu to be 2/3, and change the value of alpha and plotted them. We see that around the value of alpha to be 0.13, the plot is almost linear and parallel to this x-axis and coinciding with this line -1. That tells us that our DC conductivity is linear, and I mean it's inversely proportional to temperature. It is sigma goes as 1/T. That means the DC resistivity goes as T. You notice that the temperature range over which this is valid is pretty broad. It's around -0.5 EF to almost 0.5 EF. And as we decrease the value of gamma further, we see that the range over which this linearity persists also increases. And one interesting thing to notice, that the ratio between gamma and alpha for which the linearity existed is fixed. I mean, for 0.01, we found that linearity is good for alpha equal to 0.13, while for gamma equal to 0.001, we find that linearity is good for 0.013 when the new value is kept fixed. One more thing is to notice that the lower temperature region is completely fixed by the value of nu. Okay, so and it's independent of any other parameter value. So this lower temperature region is this is regulated by the infrared sector of our model, whereas the large T sector is large T sector is independent of all of our model parameters, which is all consistent with what we expect, the expectations.
Well, it depends on gamma, right? It depends. What you say, what you mean is independent of the holographic sector parameters at large T. The large
T, I said it is independent of all the parameters. I mean, it's kind of going towards the Fermi liquid theory kind of thing. So
yeah, but gamma is a parameter of the Fermi liquid sector. What you mean is probably that it doesn't depend on the holographic sector, the alpha and the nu and anything else.
Okay, yeah. Oh, right. Okay, so from the observation that this ratio of gamma and alpha, we can fix a ratio of gamma and alpha to find a linearity resistivity. So we now change the value of nu. and try to figure out for which ratio we get the most linear behavior. So in the plot in the left hand side, we have fixed gamma to be 0.001 and now changing nu, and we try to figure out for which value of alpha we get the linear in T behavior. And we see that around 0.7, 0.7 to 73, we get the most nice linear in T behavior. And as the nu going towards 1, the linearity kind of extends to arbitrary low temperature, even though fluctuation is larger compared to what we get for this medium value of news. Yeah, so and again you see that at the low temperature, all the plots, the value it's going towards the value nu, and again at higher temperature it's independent of this of the value of nu and alpha. And in the right hand side we have given a plot for large value of nu when we are pushing nu towards 1. We have chosen nu to be 0.95, and we show that the linear in T resistivity behavior kind of extends to very low temperature up to very high temperature for when the value of alpha is around 0.1.
Sorry, do you mind if I comment? When nu is equal on the left plot, when nu is equal to or it's approaching 1, right? I mean, then what's happening? So for small temperatures, right? Then it's basically it flattens out, or it really it tends to -1. Is that what this dashed line represents?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's going towards. I mean, it's also defined by the value of nu also. I mean,
it's exactly nu.
It's exactly nu.
That's exactly nu.
Minus
okay.
nu. Yeah, exactly.
Minus nu.
I see. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. But it has this non-monotonic behavior in the middle. It'll still have this squiggle.
Yeah, it's a little fluctuating in the middle.
Yeah, that's a good observation. That when you go closer to 1, you have a very non-monotonic kind of fluctuation. Yeah, that's right. But it's still, actually, the scales are very tiny because if you look into this right-hand plot, it is. I mean, I think the experimentalists will not say it's exactly linear. It's like very close to approximately linear. That is when they actually say linear in T, you actually mean approximately linear in T.
Linear in T.
So that is something that is coming out in the plot on the right-hand side.
Right-hand side, yeah.
Okay,
so that was the story of DC conductivity, and inspired by this DC conductivity, we are also interested to study the Hall conductivity for the similar ratio of the alpha and gamma, and see if we get the strange metallic behavior there is as well. So the formula for the off-diagonal term of the conductivity tensor is given by this. And okay, also this is not something which is readily available from literature. We following the gauge symmetry argument from paper of Ito and all, we arrived at this finite temperature real time formula for this quantity, and this also reproduces the zero temperature result given by Faulkner. We computed this and
given by Faulkner, given by this. I mean, the zero temperature. I mean, the Fermi liquid behavior is reproduced by this.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, and then we plotted that as well. For the first plot is the log plot of the Hall conductivity with temperature for the same values of the parameters. For the values we saw the linear in T resistivity behavior, and we saw here also we see that in the middle range of the temperature it's matching pretty amazingly with T to the power -2 feet. So the second plot is the slope plot, the derivative of the log plot, and you see around all the plots are coming out to be almost linear around -2. I mean, of course, there are some fluctuations, and as we move towards the marginal Fermi liquid, that as we move toward nu towards 1, the linearity kind of extend to arbitrary low temperatures.
We mean quadratic behavior, not linear.
Yeah, quadratic behavior. The t to the power minus, yeah, the t to the power minus 2, the sigma xs is goes as t to the power minus 2. Okay, now we try to fit our observation with Drude model kind of phenomenology. So what we have seen so far, that our the DC conductivity, which we call the longitudinal conductivity, is inversely proportional to temperature, and the transverse conductivity, which is given by sigma xy, that is proportional to t to the power minus 2. Now, using these two, we can compute two quantity, which one is called carrier density, and another is scattering time. And we show that carrier density is independent of temperature, and the scattering time is inversely proportional to temperature, as expected for a strange metal. So, so we compute the carrier density using this formula, and as b towards 0, the carrier density is given by this, which is totally independent of temperature. And we also compute the scattering time, and after a little bit of computation, we can show that tau is inversely proportional to temperature with this kind of ratio, which is model independent.
Sorry, we have to show that what your plots show that it is indeed model independent.
Model independent, yeah. Yeah, it's a priori not clear that
that will be reproduced from our model, but when you actually do the plots, we do see this, that
yeah. So yeah, so the first plot is the carrier density, the variation of carrier density with temperature. This carrier density is theoretically should be independent of temperature. We do see a very tiny temperature dependence, but you see the variation of the temperature over which this vary is really tiny. And here is the plot for scattering time for different values of the parameters, and you see that they are kind of collapsing nicely on a straight line, which is fitting nicely with this t to the power minus 1 fit. And you see the parameter range of we are choosing is not too small. If you see this alpha value, alpha is going from 0.023 to 0.01. All these plots we have so far done only for gamma equal to 0.001.
0.1 or 0.01? It's 0.1.
0.1.
Yeah, that's a huge order of magnitude, right?
Yeah,
and
that's almost 10 order of magnitude. We are,
and the fact that everything is collapsing on a single line is really remarkable.
Yeah, and so far I have shown you only plots for gamma equal to 0.001. These are very preliminary results. We are still reproducing data for other values of gamma to see the robustness of our claim. So yeah, that's all. So I am going to finish with summary of the work and some future direction. So we have presented a new semi-holographic model and computed the DC resistivity and show that it has this linearity temperature dependence, and Hall resistivity has quadratic in temperature dependence, provided that we have chosen the critical sector value to be above this value 0.66, and we can always tune the ratio of this coupling gamma and alpha to find this linear, strange metallic behavior. We are yet to understand the reason why this these particular ratios are preferred, we want it's our aim to investigate them further. I mean, in the future. Also, as I have said that we only have very few preliminary results on the magnetoresistance, even though remarkable, but yeah, we are trying to generate more data for more parameters value to show that our results are indeed robust for all. I mean, the Planckian dissipation is valid for it's independent of all the model parameters and etc. In any case, when one condensed matter theorist or experimentalist see our plot, they say that, oh, this temperature range is going beyond the Fermi energy, and that's very huge. I mean, it's not realistic. Fermi energy, this EF is very high temperature. So in that case, we just wanted to say that for our theory, we naturally had just only one scale, which is the Fermi energy, and to match with it with a real life metal, strange metals, we need to consider some cutoff to our theory, depending on which material we are choosing. That will probably set our scale to a value which is more realistic, and we can match our the result to a real life material. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Shutapa, for this nice talk, and let's have questions.
Yeah, I just have a very naive question. It's just that, I mean, you need to do some fine tuning to get the DC resistivity to be
Yes.
linear and the Hall resistivity to be quadratic.
Yes.
Suppose we didn't, let's say I don't know this. Okay? I don't know that it has to be this behavior. And can you estimate how that will change with as you tune the ratio of dimensionless conflicts? How does it depend on?
I mean, the average, I mean, there will be fluctuation around this t to the power -1 or t to the power -2 behavior. But overall, the slope, if you want to see, that will still remain to be for our model. At least we have shown that the average slope is still t to the power -1 or t to the power -2 for Hall resistivity. It's just that fluctuations are becoming larger when we don't tune it properly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. One good question, of course, is the thermodynamic reason why it should be, and so we are now working with Hariram to show this, right? That maybe coupling with this, if you think of this as some kind of a lattice of SYK dots, and instead of a single big bath, and so there could be some kind of thermodynamics coming out from this emergence of approximate scale symmetry at some intermediate temperatures, and that might come out. And so we want to marry with this DMFT types techniques and see if indeed the thermodynamics walks out towards self-tuning. Yeah. So that is what Hariram is also would be working on, and yeah, but indeed, I mean, we have to do this fine tuning by hand in our model, and that's. But yes, but interestingly, as you say, that a fluctuation is what is going down. That means that you are basically having some approximate scaling symmetry in this regime in the finite term, which is very unusual because normally this kind of scaling doesn't reappear in some intermediate scale, right? And this scaling is different from what you started with at zero temperature. It goes to some kind of fixed scaling, and you can fine tune it to be like this for a long temperature range. It's a really very unusual thing.
Yeah, so I also have a question, just kind of for like the future. I mean, because of like the fluid gravity correspondence, right? I mean, you could always, instead of considering a holographic theory, you can consider some fluid coupled to the system. I mean, is that something that's relevant or interesting for studying these condensed matter systems, like kind of a fluid coupled to these fermions and yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, it's not a bad question, because indeed there are some evidence of you have to remember these talks by René Meyer and all.
Yeah.
So one of the most interesting things about holography that it can explain the application of hydrodynamics to lattice scales, because so this goes back to the work of like many people, I would say, like Donos and Gauntlet and many others. So what we do is they take a lattice on the boundary, and then they show that even if you have a lattice on the boundary, at low temperatures there is some effective decoupling so you get a membrane paradigm, in the sense that at low temperatures something decouples from the rest. It's extremely non-trivial result, because the decoupling is a very deep work in GR itself, and they show that these decoupled stuff are determined by some kind of parameters on the horizon, and which they can compute, and then they show that explains why you can have this emergence of the membrane paradigm, explains why hydrodynamics holds at this lattice scale. So indeed, it could be a good idea to understand this better in the semi-holographic kind of picture, if you have this kind of emergent hydrodynamics at the lattice scale, and so this kind of semi-holographic picture can give. But okay, but I don't know what kind of phenomenology we are trying to explain there. Whereas the cuprates have a very well kind of history of phenomenology, and
okay.
But as a thing that one can always try to play around that and see what happens.
I don't know any condensed matter physics, but there is something S wave and D wave. I mean, the type of superconductivity. There's a fight going on among the condensed matter guys for the cuprates. What is this? Where does your work fit in? Or it says nothing. We only discuss the normal non-superconducting.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. Actually, this is something that I mean, what we did with Benoit and this kind of screening potential that we computed. I mean, it kind of naturally shows that we will have some kind of only D wave type superconductivity, not S wave kind of superconductivity in our type of models. Essentially, because the force becomes attractive at some finite distance, if I remember correctly, and yeah, so in a way, okay, we have not studied the superconductivity, but our kind of screening potential naturally supports a D wave type of superconductivity. Or
there's no consensus, right, in the condensed matter community, or is there that what it should be?
I think if I understand this, the opinion is more in favor in terms of it is a D wave order parameter. I think so.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other question? Okay, so if not, let us thank Sutapa again. And next week we'll have a seminar on now modular Hamiltonians by Debojyoti Sarkar. No, not Onkar would give a talk later in end of September. This will be a talk on by Debojyoti Sarkar, what he has done with Daniel Kabat.
Okay.
Next week. Okay, so see you again next week. Thanks for coming, and bye. Goodbye.